Hello and welcome to a Monday edition of the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. My name is Pat Burnham, and I am joined today by the Osceola's Bob Ferrante and Nick Carlisle. Guys, how are your brackets? Are they busted? I did two on ESPN, and one of them is just shattered. I'm in 7th million place on the one that's doing well. That's how bad it is.
I've been so disconnected from college basketball this year, I didn't even make a bracket. So I guess you can't break something if you never make it. So in other words, my bracket's perfect. I've got the last perfect bracket in America.
How about you, Bob? How's your bracket doing?
Yeah, this is the problem with these Tuesday night games is it's tough to do that 48-hour turnaround from the bracket reveal on Sunday to Tuesday. I didn't do one. I would have probably gone heavy on some of the ACC schools, like leaning on Clemson to make it to the Sweet 16. That wouldn't have panned out. Louisville getting bounced early too. So bummer at the ACC is not showing up for this one outside of Duke, but probably busted a lot of people's brackets.
Well, I can tell you who did show up to this tournament. That's the SEC with 14 freaking teams in the tournament. What the heck?
It's SEC world. It's SEC's world in college sports, and we're all just living in it.
Jesus,
so that's. But yeah, listen. I was hoping UConn would pull off the upset yesterday of Florida. I did watch that game in its entirety, but like you said, Nick, it's been a busy weekend for us. A lot going on, and we're going to get into some bracket busting later when we talk about the women's basketball team who have a game tonight and a chance to upset some people's brackets against, I believe, 3rd seeded LSU. So we'll talk to Bob a little bit about that here in a little bit. But busy weekend, baseball, guys. We're going to talk a little bit about that after we get football out of the way. But obviously a fantastic weekend for Florida State, 2-1 against Miami, including sending them home early on Thursday night, which it seems like we talked a little bit about that on Friday, but certainly it seemed like every time they hit the ball, it sailed past the fence in that game. But a lot going on. We had practice on Thursday at Florida State. We talked a little bit about that on Friday. More importantly, they went out in full pads for the first time on Saturday. We'll talk a little bit about that, what Mike had to say about it, what some of the recruits had to say about it. And then obviously the other part of our show today, one of the features of our show today will be updating on the Legacy Weekend, the recruiting weekend Florida State had this past weekend, where a number of good things happened, and including the commitment of Mike Iannata, and we'll break down Mike's commitment here shortly. But Bob, let's start with spring ball. The reports I got out of practice on Saturday was that the intensity level had picked up quite a bit from what we were expecting. And, obviously we all know people that are going to have some access to practice, and we talk to them. So the report I got was that it was a physical practice. We didn't get any great detail, but certainly, they were impressed with the intensity level of practice and how physical they were. And Mike talked a little bit about that. But go ahead and just, you were there as Nick and I were working recruiting. You were there for Mike's post-practice press conference on Saturday. What were your key takeaways from there? And what have you guys heard about practice on Saturday in particular?
Yeah, Mike Norvell has kind of emphasized throughout this offseason certain words, and they come back to accountability, physicality, having that edge, being desperate to have that edge with whether it's your final year of college football or if this is just your focal point is this year ahead if you're a freshman or sophomore, junior. I think we all know what we saw last year. This team had to be more physical. It had to want it. It had to push each individual player, push teammates within the position group, have assistant coaches who set that tone. We heard about physicality going back to Gus Malzahn's first press conference, Tony White's first press conference. Again, when you talk about it you're not trying to speak it into existence, but I think it's been an off-season talking point, a tone through strength and conditioning. That's what was needed. Like, number one, talent needs to be there, execution needs to be there, physicality's got to be there. I think, you guys heard from a lot of prospects too. I mean, when prospects are talking about the energy, when they're talking about the physicality, those are good things. Those are good things that's visible to the next generation of prospects too. But I think that's encouraging. We'd love to see it in a scrimmage down the road, right in spring. But I think just that the coaches have set this tone this early. Yes, the first padded practice, but to hear about it, that's very encouraging.
Yeah, I was impressed that some of the recruits, just in general, questions about practice is something they brought up. So obviously there has been a change. And then listen, we all hear Mike talk a lot. We kind of familiar with his cadence, the way he talks about things, whether it's generalizations or specifics. But he has not. I don't ever remember him using the word knockback, and he talked about knockbacks in practice. I don't think Mike's ever talked about knockbacks. So, and listen, I think that obviously all the conjecture, all the what Gus has said about needing to be physical and Tony said about needing to be physical is obviously something they saw on film. That was a deficiency with his football team, and we talked about it a lot during the course of the season. But even Mike is talking about, hey, just from what he said, talking about we have to be smart about it. But it certainly sounds, based off what we've heard from the players, from high school players, what the coaches have now said, it certainly seems that they have got a more design plan and they're going to be purposely physical at times during practice. And he even mentioned talking about going to the ground, which is something we don't see outside of a scrimmage. So I think that's great. The other thing I was very happy to see in our notes from practice on Saturday was the cut down the music. I think that we've talked about this before. You lose so many teachable moments when the kids on the sideline cannot hear the correction that the coach is making to the player on the field. And I've mentioned that to you guys multiple times at practice over the years. And it sounds like, listen, if you want to play music during stretch and maybe some of these individual periods where it's just rinse and repeat, just standard everyday things as the kids get loose, I'm with that. But obviously, listen, they are putting in a new offensive and defensive system. So that makes sense that they would play less music because there is more teaching going on, particularly when they get to team. But I was very happy to hear that. Anything else you guys heard that you've been particularly fired up about coming out of the first 3 days of practice?
I think one of the themes, Coach Norvell mentioned this early on, that the quarterbacks have had a command of maybe not the offense, maybe not the totality of the new scheme, but just a command of the other 10 guys on the field when they're out there. Everything's new except for Brock Glenn, right? It feels very new. Like we saw Trevor Jackson last year, we're running the scout team. So, for a lot of these guys, it's brand new personnel. It's brand new terminology. The playbook, look, how much of it is different. Mike Norvell blending in with Gus Malzahn's scheme and all that. So just to hear that quarterbacks have a command of what they're trying to execute, I don't expect that it looks good. I think in past years we've always said you've got to make significant progress from practice 1 to 15.
Yep.
That's something that I think you have to understand. There's going to be baby steps. There's going to be baby steps within just the growth and the understanding of what you're taking from the classroom, what you're taking from paper. I heard Juice Cryer say, well, I have to write out the 3-3-5. If I can write it out, I can process it and understand it. And then I can go to Stephon Thompson, who's been in the scheme at Syracuse and at Nebraska. And then we can talk, how do we put it out there on grass? So I think everybody's learning in their own way. And that's part of these first 3 practices.
I think that's part of the benefit of getting Castellanos in the portal as opposed to a different quarterback. Obviously it's going to be to be determined to see, how this truly ends up working out. But there's a certain allure and a certain logical reasoning to going and grabbing Castellanos, who has worked in a Gus Malzahn offense, versus grabbing a DJ Uyunglele and kind of shoehorning him into an offense that maybe didn't necessarily fit his strengths. And you talk about baby steps, Bob, and how you want to see growth from the first practice to the 15th practice and all those scrimmages. I remember around this time last year, maybe we weren't entirely convinced, and maybe that was an omen of things to come, that maybe we didn't see as much growth with DJ in the offense in the spring last year. And so if Tommy and Brock are truly really getting a good grasp of the offense, that's a great start already as compared to, what we were kind of hearing and looking at last year.
Yeah, and listen, obviously it's an advantage to having Castellanos in a system he's already familiar with. That there is no learning curve from him. He was in that offense. He understands what Gus wants to get done. He understands Gus's personality. Bottom line is last year, listen, they could have been. You build your offense around your quarterback in the modern football, so they were trying to do what DJ could do last year. Did coming in into a new offense, did that limit his or lengthen his learning curve? I don't know. Castellanos obviously is familiar with that offense and should be a little bit ahead of the curve. Obviously, it sounds like Brock had a good practice on Saturday. We've heard about a long run. Mike mentioned the long run. Also mentioned that Castellanos hit a couple of long verticals. We've all seen the video of Deuce Robinson making a great catch in one-on-one. We'll talk a little bit about the receivers here in a second. But we have started to hear from players after practice. And, of course, one of the things that surprised me was, and Bob, I don't know whether it was Thursday after practice or Saturday after practice, but you got both quarterbacks. I was kind of surprised that we got both. I would have thought it would have been one, because I don't remember any time where we've gotten two quarterbacks on the same day since Mike has been here, and I could be wrong. Brock got we heard good things about Brock in the offseason. I don't think anybody thinks it's a true quarterback competition at this point. You would think Castellanos is the guy, but I think it was very intentional that those two guys were interviewed on the same day. What is your read on that? And is this maybe it is Tommy's job, but we understand the past, and Brock, you better be ready type of thing?
Yeah, I think to start, Mike Norvell can't complete a thought to a question on Tommy Castellanos without also talking about Brock Glenn and inserting Kevin Sperry and maybe even Trevor Jackson. So Norvell's diplomacy, I think, understanding that he has to mention all the quarterbacks, that diplomatic is coming back into play. Let's start there.
Well, there is that thing called the portal that opens up at the middle of April.
Coming to a computer software near you for 10 days in late April. Yes.
Yes.
No, I think with Brock, it's a respect for who he is, the competitor who he is. What we saw on the field around a offensive skill set of playmakers that just wasn't very functional, and offensive line wasn't very functional. I'm not sure we really know how good Brock Glenn can be beyond what we've seen of him in practice. Is a guy who's got really good wheels, is very much a competitor, and has been since he was 18 years old 2 years ago, out there going up against 23-year-olds on a top 5 defense. I think we have to respect who Brock is, because I think the coaching staff believes in him. And I just leave it here. Like, nobody wants to see injuries, but quarterback injuries are the nature of the sport. High school, college, pro. The old mantra is the NFL team is you're only as good as your backup quarterback. Florida State's only going to be as good as its backup quarterback options. It's popped up the last couple of years. Tommy Castellanos is about my height, a little bit bigger than me, not a big guy at all. To think that you're going to go through a season with a quarterback, with a single starting quarterback, is really not realistic in this era of football, especially when you're going to run the ball.
Yeah, as you're ready to say, the type of offense we're going to see with Castellanos, who is going to ad-lib with his legs anyway.
Right.
obviously, the more hits you take, the more stuff you are to injury. And listen, I thought, you did an article on Brock that's at theosceola.com. And if you have not read it, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. Again, I was surprised they had both kids, but was very impressed with what Brock had to say. And he really does show some resolve to be a part of the solution. And after this season, you didn't have a lot of guys that were wanting to stick around, right? I mean, we thought the retention was better than we thought it would be, but given the situation that they were going to bring in a portal quarterback, but I continue to be impressed with his mental toughness, his way he's decided, hey, I'm going to stick it out. Now, we all know things can change, but just what was your takeaway and what were some of your favorite things that he said in that interview? Because I thought he showed a very positive attitude for a guy that's been what he's been through in basically 15, 16 games since he started against Louisville, the ACC championship game, what's now 2 seasons ago. And then, I think he, and in retrospect, he, like every other quarterback that lined up for Florida State last year, took some undue criticism because of the offensive line they were playing against. But what were your thoughts after you were there for that interview? You got to ask questions. Just what were your thoughts on how he said and how he handled himself?
We talk about competitive. I think every time we bring up Brock Glenn by name, that's what the coaches say first. It's Mike Norvell. What was Gus Malzahn's first impression when we asked Gus about Brock, at the luncheon last week, how competitive he is and everything he does, from the fourth quarter drills, how he learns, how he talks in the quarterback room. I think they like that personality. What is Brock Glenn's strength right now? He's got that ultra competitive personality. He's got that love of Florida State. I think that everybody would say he's a great teammate. Now it's just, how do those physical skills blend in with all of those, highly lovable character and personality traits? He thinks this offense will work well for him. We've spent an off season saying honestly that Tommy Castellanos is a perfect system fit for Gus Malzahn. I'm not going to say that Brock Glenn is, but I think when you're looking for a number 2 quarterback, a really capable backup option, you would look at Brock and say, that's a guy that can run. That's a guy who is going to be competitive and tough. We'll see if he can stretch the field. We know Gus wants to stretch the field. Can Brock? The other advantage is Brock knows that Florida State's going to play fast. He's been around Mike Norvell for now year 3. Brock knows the expectation is to execute the offense at a high level very, very quickly. So look at advantages of making sure you retain somebody who's a number 2 quarterback. I think Brock checks a lot of boxes. Yeah. I think he's, again, is he ideal? Does he have a high completion percentage? Did he protect the ball last year? Yes. There's all the negatives that he put out there. But again, it was all around a non-functioning offensive line. Yep. and a skill set of receivers that just wasn't there. So this is an important year for Brock to show, can he be a guy for Florida State? Can he be the guy in 2026 at Florida State? Right. Honestly, I mean, that's a potential question, right?
Right. Well, and it's just like Keller Lowry, who's a former FSU quarterback himself, just made the comment: the game slows down, the more reps you get, and Florida State needs that to happen for Brock if he is put in the game, and we do think that he will play at some point next year for all the reasons we've talked about. And the game will slow down for him tremendously if he's not running for his life in the backfield every time they drop back to pass. And that is one of the reasons he had a low passing percentage last year. But we'll see how it plays out. And, of course, that leads a perfect segue into what we want to talk about. As you know, we have been going through each position group since we started coming back on a regular schedule. And we're going to talk a little bit now about the position that is going to catch the ball when Tommy Castellanos does drop back. And it's new looking room, Bob, for to some extent. 2 of our 3 projected starters are transfers. It's the common theme on offense for Florida State. It's just about everybody outside of running back. one wide receiver spot and one offensive line spot is going to be filled by a transfer. But listen, you lost 75% of the production at wide receiver for Florida State. Malik Benson is gone. Ja'Kai Douglas is gone. Deuce Spann is gone. But what do you make of this Florida? And we did hear some positive things about them coming out of one of the first 2 days of practice. Now, you got to take that into consideration. It is in shorts and helmets, and so you should look pretty damn good if you're a football player at practice in shorts and helmets. So, but good nevertheless, because a lot of times we hear about drops, and we didn't hear much about drops after those 2 practices. So, what's your take on the wide receiver room, Bob?
I think Florida State went for a type. It went for height. It went for physicality. And I think, Nick, we talked about this last week, went for guys that could be good perimeter blockers. I mean, that's something that could develop as we start to see, this team in 11-on-11 situations, maybe in that open scrimmage. Looking forward to potentially seeing that. But when you've got height like a Deuce Robinson, you've got a Jordan Scott, Hakeem Williams is pretty tall and is getting more physical as his body's filling out. This wide receiver room had to be completely torn up and restarted pretty much from the ground up. But I think we saw this in 2022 to some extent too. You had to see Micah Pittman come in and set a standard for how practice looked like every day. And it made a Johnny Wilson better. You have to have better competition at receiver, because what we saw last year on that practice field, what we saw on game days, it didn't work, and it didn't make anybody look good out there. It didn't make your running game functional. It's all complimentary. Again, Pat, to use one of your favorite terms, nothing was complimentary last year. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, beyond Deuce and beyond Squirrel, I think we're still kind of curious what it all looks like. Jalen Lucas can be called a running back, but he's still probably Florida State's best returning playmaker. I think that might be fair to then say, okay, blend that in with Deuce and Squirrel. But I think we feel good about the options out there, so much better than what we saw last November, honestly.
Oh, I think Squirrel White and Jalen in the slot is alternating reps in the slot would be awesome. Listen, with a guy like Squirrel at receiver, the FSU passing game's got to go nuts, right?
Here we go. Put it on the T-shirt.
Dad joke. That's right. Dad joke. All right. So, yeah, listen, I think, I have watched a little bit of his highlights or huddle games. He had 34 catches last year, I think, at Tennessee, or 23, something like that. But, listen, he is very elusive. I think it's going to be fun to watch him play. Deuce Robinson, I know a lot's expected of him after the transfer from USC. He was fairly active for them last year, 23 catches for 396 yards. So he's, you got to think his best football is still in front of him. But again, a long guy. We've seen Mike kind of gravitate towards the longer receivers as longer he's been here. Squirrel had 34 for 381 last year. Also returns punts. So that's going to be fun to watch him. 16 yards per return last year. It's pretty good. It's going to be fun to see that. And then listen, I think we all liked LaWayne McCoy, at least his potential that we've seen in practice over the course of the last year. We'd really like, we'd not be interested to see how BJ Gibson does splitting time between football and baseball. But any of the young guys that you guys are looking forward to seeing this spring and their development?
Yeah, I think the question, when we talked to, I think Kurt was in on the interview with Coach Harris, the wide receivers coach, and asking about, Gibson and Danzy. I think they're not sure what to expect from Gibson and Danzy just because their time is so splintered this spring. Gibson made that trip down to Coral Gables with the baseball team. Danzy running track and running at a high level on the indoor side. We'll see him on the outdoor side this weekend. I think Harris basically said what we get out of those two guys in particular this spring will be a bonus. I think they know that those guys are focusing on their in-season sport, and it's just not the full focal point for football right now. Curious about Camden Fryer, honestly. Curious about does Jaylen Brown become a guy that, his ranking suggested he was a top 100 type. Do we see a Jaylen Brown that's more focused, that catches the ball, or does the light not turn on? In the end, you've got Mike Norvell as receivers coach. You've got Tim Harris Jr. as receivers coach, with two guys, intensely coaching receivers. How does it look, and who comes out of this competitive atmosphere, and it looks good day after day?
And where does Elijah Moore sit in everything as well? He's a guy that got there during the summer last year. Thought he could play right away, and who knows, maybe if there was a 16-game season, he might have gotten in towards the end there. But with a full spring for Elijah, we all know from watching practice last year that Mike Norvell was already giving him the extra hard treatment, meaning that the potential that Norvell sees in Elijah Moore is there for him to be successful. So is he one of those guys that has a good spring and could be able to cycle in with a guy like Deuce Robinson on the outside as a more bigger, as a big bodied receiver? So there's a lot of those kind of second year, fringe third year guys that, with a good spring can find themselves in a good little window to really factor into the two deep when things come around in the fall.
Yeah, and going back to Danzy, I am very glad that they went ahead and decided to use him in one position as opposed to do what they did over the years with Toafili, which was moving back and forth. I think Lawrence would have been a great receiver at Florida State, and obviously when he was recruited by Michael was recruited by Florida State, that was our comp, right? If you want to compare him to somebody on Florida State's roster, that's who it was. And so, and obviously he's got great speed. We saw flashes of that and what limited playing time he had. And I do want to go back to Hank's question, because Hank seems I know Jerry's answered it online, but personality doesn't matter if you can't play, and Brock can't play. 44% passer is awful. Well, as Hank, what we said, we're talking about him because we wrote an article about him, and he is going to probably be called on last year, whether people are happy, or next year, whether that's who's on your roster. And what we know is Florida State went through 3 quarterbacks last year and 2 quarterbacks a year before that. So there is reason to talk about a backup quarterback, particularly given Castellanos' history. But as we stated, we're talking about him because we wrote about him, and we were impressed with the way the kid's handled himself. And I think he will be a factor in a game next year, or maybe the season. We'll see what happens. But that's why we're talking about Brock. And we'll talk about Tommy a little bit later in the week, because we are going to do an article on Tommy Castellanos that'll come out the next day or so, and we'll talk more about them. And we previewed the entire quarterback room last week, so it's just topical, I guess, would be the reason for our conversation about Brock and what we heard. So anyway, that's why we're doing that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit about FSU Legacy Recruiting Weekend, and also a little bit about baseball, who's got Florida coming up tomorrow after a nice little weekend series in South Beach, and a little bit about the women's basketball game against LSU. We'll be right back in about 1 minute. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Seminole fans! Alumni Hall is your ultimate FSU shopping experience and has moved to a new location off Timberlane Road in Tallahassee. Shop FSU gear from Nike, Champion, New Era, Yeti, and more. Alumni Hall has Seminole gear for the entire family, plus accessories and gifts. Spend $150 and you'll earn $10 off your next purchase with their Hall Pass rewards. Stop by their new location on Timberlane Road near REI, or shop anytime online at alumnihall.com. Alumni Hall, where Seminole fans shop. Finding an experienced lawyer you can trust is crucial. With over 50 years of combined litigation experience, the attorneys at Mowry Law Firm are dedicated to providing our clients with exceptional legal services, focusing on car and trucking accidents, premises liability, and wrongful death. Call 904-824-7799, MowryLaw.com.
All right, welcome back to the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. I am Pat Burnham. I'm with Bob Ferrante, the editor of the Osceola, and recruiting writer, analyst, and aspiring recruiting guru, Nick Carlisle. And Nick was very busy this weekend because Florida State had FSU, its legacy recruiting weekend. They had a bunch of former players in town to talk to, about 24 high-priority recruits, most of them for 2026 recruits. We did have 3 or 4 2027s and a couple of big name 2027s like Caden Henderson. But guys, it was a busy weekend, and Florida State, ironically, or possibly planned, got a legacy commitment on legacy weekend. And as offensive tackle Mike Ionata, who is the son of former FSU offensive lineman Joey Ionata, and the nephew of former FSU offensive lineman and All-American offensive lineman John Ionata, and the brother of Alabama offensive lineman Joey Ionata Jr., committed to Florida State on Saturday afternoon. That was, I think he committed probably early tomorrow. It sounds like he committed as soon as he went into Mike's office, but obviously a nice pickup for Florida State. As we have talked about, they're going to have to sign a number of offensive linemen via the portal or the high school ranks because they're going to lose at least 8. We do know that. And he is a big kid. He's listed at 6'6", 290. He looks every bit of 6'6" to me. If he's not 6'6", he's 6'5". He is rated a 3-star prospect, guys. He's FSU's second offensive lineman to commit to Florida State, along with Xavier Payne. Listen, I think it's a good take. I think Mike's best football is ahead of him. He's still, and I tried to explain it on our message board today, I think he's one of those kids that's gotten so big, so tall at such a young age. He is still learning to operate in his body, if that makes sense to you. If you've ever tried to evaluate a kid who's not quite developed into his frame, basically. And I think I know they're recruiting him as a tackle. I think he'll probably get a shot at starting like at right tackle when he gets here. I think he projects as a guard when he gets here, and he's more comfortable in pass protection if you watch his huddle highlights than his run game. He's got a little bit of, I called him raw, but certainly a kid that's got a tremendous pedigree, tremendous love for the university, and we've talked a little bit about how Florida State needs some guys that are going to come here because of Florida State, right, in this ever fluid world of college football. But listen, I've known his family for years. It was a great moment for his family. Nick, I know you talked to him after he committed to Florida State. What did he say, and what caught your attention when he was talking to you guys about the commitment?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think he kind of walked into Florida State on Saturday kind of having an inkling that maybe was the day that he pulled the trigger on a commitment. And he sat down with Mike Norvell first thing in the morning, and he told Mike that, essentially if you still have me, I would love to commit to you. And obviously Mike was really enthused by that, and that's how all that went down. I think, first of all, I think you see fit. I think you see a nice fit for him here. And I'm really a fan of this take on the grounds that, one, you're taking a kid that, as you have already kind of noted, 6'6", 295, has a lot of room to build into that body as well, but he's also agile for that size and for the body type that he has. So I like the take on that grounds. And I like that Florida State is taking prospects like this. I think I said something to the effect of you on Saturday. Man, remember around this time last year when there were only 3 or 4 kids committed, and it felt like it was a long haul for Florida State to be able to hit on some prospects that they wanted. You're taking prospects that want to be here, that are going to enjoy Florida State for the fit that it is, and for what the opportunity that they have to play here. So he's excited for that. And ultimately, beyond all the family ties and the legacy, the ultimate aspect of this is that he just feels like Herb Hand, as an offensive line coach, and Florida State as an offensive scheme is a great fit for him. So he's got a couple of more visits to play out. I think he said he was going to go to Alabama and maybe North Carolina as well. I think those were the two. Alabama for sure, obviously. Of course, his older brother is at Alabama. I think he has an official maybe he's going to take an official visit there. But as far as that is concerned, I think this is a great take and a welcomed addition to the recruiting class that's now, I don't know if it went down or up or budged at all, but they're 12th in the country, 8 commitments, all from the state of Florida, which also is something that I think is really cool, is that they're really swinging bats in their home state this cycle early on.
Yeah, and I've been asked if they're going to try to get Joey to transfer from Alabama. I'm on board with that. I don't know that they will do it. I asked Joe Sr. A while back, hey, is he happy at Alabama? Because we need some offensive linemen at Florida State, and Joey indicated that he was indeed happy at Alabama. But I've been asked that question multiple times, who people know that the story behind that. And really, I thought they missed on the evaluation of his brother, who I think was a very, very, very good prospect. And so I was glad to see that Florida State can overcome that, because I know there was some disappointment when that took place. So obviously, whatever discussions Mike and the Ionata family have had, smoothed whatever misunderstandings there were. But so I was concerned that maybe because Mike's probably going to be a guy who only sees his recruiting profile grows, because I do think he's going to have a better senior year than he did a junior year, just as a natural progression type of thing. So a good, and listen, his mom was fired up. She told us outside the Moore Center that, that she hadn't had a lot of reason to wear Florida State stuff because Joey was at Alabama, and they've mostly been going to either high school games or Alabama games, depending on which of the boys they're watching on what weekends. And she says she can finally gets to dig into the closet and get a bunch of Joe Sr.'s old Florida State gear, swag out, and can start wearing that. And we were talking about the old we got a nice conversation with Joe Sr. and a former offensive lineman, Reggie Dixon, outside the Moore Center Saturday about the old Burt Reynolds jackets and sweaters, and it was an interesting conversation. But anyway, the family they're going to be able to repurpose clothes now. It was a good move for the entire family. The Ionators are going to save money shopping, so they get to bring out some of Joe Sr.'s Florida State stuff. So that was good. Listen, there were a ton of kids in town. Bowie Bentley, the quarterback from Texas, was in town. Hezzy Kent, Samari Matthews, Graham Houston, Jay Lamar, Deuce Geralds, Caden Henderson. Who am I forgetting, Nick? There are a ton of people.
Xavier Griffin. Let's see. You said Hezzy Kent, Samari. Yeah. Xavier was back. Cameron Wilson, a defensive end, was there the day before. He didn't actually make it to the practice on Saturday. Jabarius Guerra, who's a 2027 prospect, but he's going to be one of those dogs at defensive end in the 2027 cycle. Right. They got him back. Did you know that his nickname was Chicken, by the way?
Who?
Jabarius Guerra. His nickname is Chicken. Did you know that? So just to tell you how nuts recruiting is, I've met a rhino this cycle, and there's a chicken coming up next cycle. There's some potential All-American name selections in the upcoming class. That's for sure.
I'm going to give you deal with Guthrie's.
Yeah, I'm going to give you some breaking news, what I think will be breaking news. All right, so I just got tweeted at by, you mentioned his name a second ago, Cameron Wilson, the defensive end from Miami. I got the 2 eye emojis, followed by at Knowles247, at Zach Blowstein 247, at Osceola Pat, and it's a picture of him and Norvell. I also recently read an article where Florida State has moved up to the front of his, so we could be on another commitment watch. Maybe he just sent us the pic because he likes the picture, but just reading the tea leaves the way Twitter happens. So we'll see what happens there. Cameron was on campus Thursday for practice. So, all right. So we do not want to tell you. We're not going to break down every single kid's visit to Florida State this past weekend. If you want to get that, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. Nick has several articles out, particularly on Graham Houston. We got Hezzy Kent. I did an article on him. Samari Matthews. Nick did an article on Deuce Gerald's. Sam Spiegelman has contributed to this weekend's reports. He's got updates on Bowie Bentley and Deuce Gerald's for sure. So please go to theosceola.com or floridastaterivals.com to get our full recruiting update from this weekend. But so, guys, I want to kind of break it down to save some time. And just talk about a couple of recruits that either you think Florida State helped or hurt themselves with this weekend. And listen, most recruiting weekends, you're only going to help yourself, right? So I'm just trying to, while we're going to talk about them, right? Or maybe indifferent. So because my two are going to be, one, they helped themselves, one I think is indifferent at this point. But anyway, all right, so Samari Matthews, obviously I interviewed Samari couple of months ago or about a month ago for Seminole Sidelines. Great interview, tremendous kid. You know, there are some kids that you, because you talk to him so much or interact with him, you really get a appreciation for him. But he's a great interview. Now I had him being a heavy South Carolina lean coming into this unofficial visit with Florida State. And I think what you see now is the method behind the madness and why they want to bring in these former players in that are in the NFL, and even some that are like Bill Reagan's, who spoke to the group of 24 high-level prospects on Saturday. But he specifically mentioned that in his post-visit interview, which you can read at theosceola.com. And I really think that his conversations with Renardo and hearing and he even mentioned some of the older players that didn't play for Mike, like a Bill Reagan's and like a Reggie Dixon and Corey Simon, who were all there on Saturday, along with a bunch of guys like Jermaine Johnson and Jared Verse and Braden Fisk and Keir Thomas. You heard him talk about how much value he got out of that those conversations. So I think then so what I'm saying is I think it's down to Florida State and South Carolina are neck and neck, I think, right now with Samari. I think there's a couple other schools he's going to take visits to. But I do think that is one prospect who probably left here feeling a little bit better about Florida State. And listen, we understand when these recruits are coming right off a visit, when we talk to them 30 seconds after, they're still on kind of this high, right? We've talked about this before. When is the right time to interview a kid post-visit? Because you're always going to hear all the right things. So even in factoring that post-visit high in, I do think that Florida State helped themselves with Samari. I think he's the kind of kid you want your program based off everything that we've heard about him. And then my other guy I want to talk about is Bowie Bentley, because he is a quarterback. We do need to talk about him now. Sam's got some quotes from him, and you go to the Osceola.com to check those out. I think they're still in a holding pattern. I don't think, the kid did not say after his visit that, hey, I'm definitively scheduling an official visit for Florida State for later this year or later this summer. And Nick, you and I talked about this on another show. I think the quarterback position in particularly, who they get is going to primarily be based off how they do on the field in 2025. And I think that's going to impact the recruitment at that position specifically. And I do think that even if they don't get, and we talked about this for many different kids at many different positions, I don't read too much into him not giving them an official visit right now. He said his whole time that he was going to do this little spring tour and then make a decision. But so I think they're still where they are with him, and I think a lot that will happen with Florida State at the quarterback position will be determined by how this offense looks in 2025 compared to how it looked in 2024. All right, Nick, who do you got? What are the one or two guys you want to talk about from this past weekend?
I want to talk about Lee County's safety, Laziah Jackson, who I think out of all the prospects that were on campus on Saturday, I think Florida State's in the best standing for him right now. you talked about Samari earlier and how, when you're talking to somebody, you can kind of the more you talk to them, you get a better vibe for their personality. This kid is one of the more sincere interviews that I think that I've come across in my few years of covering recruiting. He's very well spoken, very mature. And he left that visit openly saying, yeah, I think that this visit put Florida State at the top for me right now. Now, how much of that is a visit high? We don't know. He kind of alluded to it when he talked to us, like, yeah, that's kind of just the way that I'm feeling after today. And, how good of a relationship Mike Norvell is building with me and my mother. So it looks like Norvell is making a true effort to build a relationship with Jackson, who is a 6'3", 175. He's probably more of a true safety, kind of like Tadarius Hughes, who is already committed to the program. But no, he said that the player panel really, really got to him. I think he even used the word that he got a little bit emotional hearing all the testimony from some of those players that came back. And I think it's important to note that, in past years, maybe one or two or three of these former players would end up coming back. There were upwards of like 11 or 12 of the alumni from not only the ACC championship winning team, but the year before that coming back and giving their testimonies, which I think is important considering that, sometimes these legacy weekends, there isn't always that push. I mean, it's there, but I guess that's to say sometimes it's there, but this week it was really, really prevalent. And I think that helped with a lot of the guys that they brought in this weekend who Florida State may have wanted to catch up with a couple of them. I think Laziah Jackson is somebody that they have really high on their board. And I think that the feeling is mutual when it comes to Jackson. He's got official visits to Alabama, Georgia Tech, Stanford, and Florida State right now. He said he did enjoy his visit to Clemson a couple of weeks ago, so the Tigers may get involved as well. But I think this is a very winnable recruiting battle for Florida State, and they certainly gave him a lot to think about.
Well, he's got a teammate coming down here next fall, so that'll help.
Yeah, and Usman is in his ear, he said. Usman is in his ear about joining the Seminoles. So I came away impressed with the interview, and, visit highs be what they be. I think they're in a really good spot for him.
Yeah, and, of course, Bob, is anybody, any one or two particular recruits you want to talk about?
I think one guy maybe in particular, and then a trend that you guys have obviously hit on, but we need to reinforce. I think Herb Hand came in probably off of UCF with guys he had relationships with. I think he had really done his homework building some early relationships with 2026 guys. Obviously, you're seeing that with all the official visits being scheduled. I thought the Graham Houston interview was really, really good. Wasn't one I was in on, but getting to watch that, reading Nick's story, Graham strikes me as a no-nonsense guy. Buford, Georgia. Just enjoyed the visit. Enjoyed the visit, liked Herb Hand, but basically said, hey, I wasn't going to waste Florida State's time. If I wasn't interested, they're not going to waste my time if they weren't interested in me. It really feels like it's early, feeling good, mutual interest in each other. So it's look, they've got so many official visits from so many offensive linemen. It almost makes you feel good March going into April that they've really gotten a quantity and quality look at some of the options that are out there, who's interested, who's Florida State interested in, just kind of stockpiling that board, making it as deep as possible. So it makes me feel good because, Pat, like you said, all these transfer offensive linemen are going to move on at some point. You've really got to go big, big, big with this offensive line class of 26. It just feels like they're in a good spot. Again, early, knock on wood, March, but it feels good early. Yeah,
and one of the criticisms we had last year of Florida State's recruiting process was the fact that we, when Fish and Nick and I would sit down and talk about it on sidelines, was the fact that we didn't think the pool was deep enough at most position groups. Right? They got didn't have enough defensive ends on the hook. Same thing at linebacker. We saw that, and they really, at some point we're going to sit down and talk about this revised or revamped recruiting mentality Florida State has. Listen, I think some of that's a little bit overblown. You either evaluate properly or you don't. You either evaluate enough kids or you don't. There's no real way to totally revamp your process. So anyway, we'll talk about that another time. But they are showing improvement in the fact that they are having a deeper pool and seem to understand the numbers game of this a little bit better than they have in the past because they were – listen, they started going late back in on defensive ends. That's how two of the guys that are on FSU's roster this year are there because they lost out on Jared Smiths of the world. So glad to see that they're getting all these official visits. And we did learn that they're going to get an official visit from Jay Lamar, the highly sought after running back from South Georgia. He told Nick that he would be here on June the 6th. And listen, man, if anything tells you how crazy recruiting is during this time of year, Jay Lamar was in Columbus, Ohio, visiting Ohio State on Thursday and Friday, flew back home, drove down to Tallahassee. And we think he may have come straight from the airport to Tallahassee. We're still not sure about that. But long story short, showed up late in the afternoon on Saturday at Florida State. Left Florida State and either drove to Clemson on Sunday morning or flew to Clemson on Sunday. I'm not sure.
He drove.
He drove. But that kid is putting in some miles, and that was his weekend. But, Florida State, to their credit, and I think I think he'll be a challenge to get when you already have a running back in the fold for 2026. But to their credit, they maximized that 2 or 3 hour window they had with Jay and secured an official visit. So that was a good lick for Florida State. But again, we could go through every kid on the list, but this show would last for hours and hours, and we're going to try to keep it to about 10 more minutes. So please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com and check out our recruiting coverage from the weekend. Some of it will be in front of the paywall. Some of it may be behind the paywall, which gives you a chance to subscribe to the Osceola. So please consider subscribing to the Osceola when you go there. All right, guys, let's shift gears a little bit. A lot that's going on at Florida State right now outside of football, which has been obviously the biggest portion of this show. But we had another great weekend of Florida State baseball. Bob, who just beat the living heck out of Miami on Thursday night, and then finished out the series win on Saturday evening. Listen, Link's got them going. They had that one little letdown against Mercer, and you're probably not going to beat Miami 3 of 3 every series, but got Florida coming up tomorrow. So what do we need to know about Link and his boys?
I think the big picture is this weekend pitching staff is built for Florida State to win 2 out of 3, just about any series, home or away. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. I know a lot of people wanted that sweep after the run roll win on Thursday. But the way it plays out, Jamie Arnold had probably the worst Jamie Arnold start we've seen in almost 2 calendar years, probably. But this pitching staff on the weekend side, again, good enough for Florida State to win a lot of these series going to ACC play. And you look at the rankings, there's going to be a lot of top 25 matchups down the road. It's not just Notre Dame this weekend, but you look at the Wake Forest, North Carolina, Clemson on down the line, a lot of great series home and away. The thing that we're kind of monitoring, obviously, is the midweek starter. They lost Evan Crest a couple weeks ago in that Tuesday role, literally injured second inning, and clarity on what's to come for him is a mystery. So Florida State's seeking out who is that opener, again, using this term of going to start but not going to pitch deep. So Florida State, as Kurt Weiler's reported, will go with John Abraham Tuesday night in Jacksonville against Florida. So John Abraham, right-hander, he's pitched really well against Florida in the past last year. So very capable. Is he going to be a 5 or 6 inning guy? Absolutely not. But can he go 3? Can he get you into the 4th inning? The ball game in Link's view is get you 27 outs somehow. We've seen what this lineup can do. I don't think we need to hit on the lineup too much for today, but I know people are curious about the pitching, how it's all going to work out. So Tuesday night in Jacksonville, no TV. It's a big bummer, but listen to Lulu on the radio, and Kurt Weiler will have the live game thread on the Osceola Village.
Yeah, and I always, whenever I've said this a million times on Seminole Sidelines, we get to baseball season. Every time I think of Lulu, I think of Bull Durham when the guy was doing the away games from the empty home stadium, and to do the crack of the bat, he'd take that little wooden bat, and hit that little 2x4, and so anyway, Lulu. They need to get Lulu a partner. They need to get Lulu a Bob Euchre in there with him. But yeah, so hey, but what about a Lincoln alum just knocking the cover off the ball? 38-38, Lincoln High School representing for, is it Miles Bailey? Is that his name, Miles Bailey? Or am I confusing him with I know his dad, so sometimes I think his dad's name is Kevin. But anyway, man, that guy's hitting the cover off the ball. And then I heard the announcers talking about, you got a really good catcher in Jackson West, but then DeLon Malure comes out and knocks 2 over the fence. And who do you play the next day? So good problems to have at Florida State baseball right now. All right, well, we will have coverage of the post, and actually Kurt's got all his coverage from this past weekend at the Osceola.com, and we will have coverage tomorrow night at the Osceola on the Florida game. All right, so big hoops. There's a lot of things going on in hoops right now for Florida State, women's and men's. But the most important thing is going on at 6 p.m. tonight when 6th-seeded Florida State takes on third-seeded LSU in what I believe is a round of 32. So, Bob, what's it? How are the Lady Noles looking for this matchup?
I think on their best day, Florida State's capable of winning this game. It comes down to, Brooke Wyckoff will say it comes down to rebounding. We've seen this team rebounding at a high level at times. At others, not so much. Honestly, against George Mason, we saw George Mason had too many offensive boards, but couldn't convert those into second chance points. We're going to see some good basketball tonight. It's a tough road atmosphere, even though we call this a neutral site this time of year. Florida State has done well away from Tallahassee. They've beaten Notre Dame, North Carolina, Georgia Tech. It can happen. You really, again, you want to see the best version of Florida State. I think everybody kind of gets into that coach speaky term now. But when Tanaya Latson's on, when she is able to run that fast break, when OMG is driving, when Michaela Timpson has a double-double, Sydney Bowles, a Texas A&M transfer, when she's putting it up from 3, this team is capable of scoring 85 points. It's about what they're averaging. 85 points in 40 minutes is pretty silly for women's college basketball, but they can put up some serious numbers. Stylistically, I can't tell you I know exactly how they're going to match up against LSU, but I think you might be in a situation where you got to battle that crowd in Baton Rouge. You have to put up a lot of points, and really it would be an upset. It would be an upset to see them go into Baton Rouge and pull this one out.
Well, I hope they win, because I'm not a fan of LSU's head coach, and obviously still, I graduated from Florida State, but Kim Mulkey drives me crazy. I can't wait to see what she's wearing. She's always good for that, but she's always got some kind of bespeckled outfit on, and it'll be fun to see what she's wearing. But yeah, so Florida State's got that game tonight. Now, obviously, as we said, we'll have coverage of Florida State's baseball game tomorrow against Florida. We will have post-practice coverage of Florida State's football practice tomorrow, and they will have a couple of more South Georgia visitors there. We know at least that defensive end prospect Cam Brooks and his teammate Jaden Dunbar will both be there for unofficial visits tomorrow to take in Florida State's practice. So we'll have post-practice coverage from that. We'll be back on Wednesday here to talk to you about all things Florida State, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, or golf. We didn't have. I don't know how Luke did this weekend in the Valspar. Did anybody get a final score on Luke? Did he make the cut? I didn't get a chance to watch much golf this weekend. So anyway, we'll be back on Wednesday at 3. We do want to thank you for joining us. If you're not a subscriber to the Osceola YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button and then the notification button so that you will be updated when we are doing these shows live or taped. And right now our schedule is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 p.m. And sometimes we'll go long, sometimes we'll go short. We're trying to keep it to an hour, but Mark and I went over a little bit the last couple of shows, and we're going to be right on an hour today. And, of course, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com and check out all our information. Like I said, we have articles on Hezzy Kent, Samari Matthews, Sam Spiegelman's got Bowie Bentley. So we've got just about 8 to 10 of the kids that were here. We have articles on those kids individually. So please go to theosceola.com. Check those out. We've also got an article that Kurt has done on Luke Laux and what he is doing with the basketball program and planning, extensive planning has prepped Luke for his first portal experience as a college basketball coach. And there's got to be nothing like jumping straight into the portal at your first day on campus as a head coach. And so I'm sure it's going to be a learning experience for Luke and the Florida State basketball program, but a lot of stuff going on. So please check out theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. And if you enjoy what you read, we ask you to subscribe to the Osceola. We think you enjoy our coverage, but we thank you for joining us. And Clanton did made cut, tied 42nd at Vols Bar. All right, so congratulations to Luke. I don't think that was his first as a pro because he's still retaining his amateurism until after this season. But anyway, he's got his card whenever he wants to put it into effect. Isn't that right, Bob? So, all right, so a big weekend for Florida State sports, a big week coming up, and we will see you Wednesday on the Osceola Seminole Sidelines. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Nick. I'm so used to seeing Mark on the other side of the screen. So everyone have a great afternoon. Do what?
I look good if I look like Mark.
Well, I want to see how Mark looks after that Meat Madness weekend he had.
Meat Madness. Like he's probably unconscious somewhere right now. Just
he looked like he lost about 20 pounds. He looked like he lost 20 pounds in the last video we had with him. But after meat, he was having brisket and tomahawk steaks, and he was having a gamut of things. But anyway, we'll be back on Wednesday with Seminole Sidelines. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.